welcome to our 4th episode of Highlights from the Permanent Collection. I'm standing in Eisenstadt today because we have a really fun program planned. I'll be going over 2 of our antique rugs, and then we'll be virtually traveling to Kent, Ohio, as Diana Pemberton does a really special demo on how fibers are naturally dyed, just like how they're done for these rugs. Let's go ahead and take a closer look.
Okay, so the first rug that we have here is an Isfahan oriental rug. And these weavers were highly influenced by calligraphy and mosaic work. And I think that that's really prevalent here, as we can see in these distinctive curvilinear, delicate floral forms. And this is a design that rugs from this region commonly have, or most commonly have. This is what they generally kind of look like. They have a high knot density, which is something that is different about them. So basically what that means is the fibers that are knotted together to make these patterns per square inch have a high density. So there's a lot more of them per square inch than you would find in other rugs. And the fibers are generally made out of fine materials, including silk and lamb's wool. The second rug that I have to show is quite a bit more elaborate, and this one is a Kerman or Kirman. And people from this region were known for their weaving traditions as well. Around the 19th century, Kerman unfortunately was destroyed and the people fled to Lever. So sometimes the rugs are also referred to as Lever Kirman or Lever. And these rugs are known for their distinctive designs derived from Persian as well as European themes. And I think that's something that's really prevalent in the one that we have here. Taking a closer look at the smaller tiles with the trees in the center, because those look very European in style. Something else of note about these tree designs is that's known as a tree of life motif, and it's a popular one that's found in rugs from this region. Taking a closer look at the brushed fibers of this rug, as we can see, they're really fine, and the colors are somewhat muted. Lastly, showing the center strip, which has this really interesting text-like design. And I'm not sure, but I wonder if that actually says something, which is pretty interesting.
And now the demo from Diana.
Hey guys, my name is Diana. I'm an artist primarily working in textiles. I just recently graduated with my MFA from Kent State University in their textile program. And today I'm going to talk to you guys and show you guys how to use natural dyes. And we're going to learn some new things and have some fun. So let's do it. The first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is mordants. So mordants are really important when getting into natural dyes, because what a mordant is it's a heavy metal that's been produced into a powder form. So it's a metal salt, and they're usually white powders. And typically the mordant is needed to help bind whatever dye you're working with to the fabric or the fiber that you're trying to dye. This is something that happens on a molecular and a chemical level. So it's not something, that you can see with the naked eye, but it's part of this chemical process, which is essentially what dyeing is. So the Latin root for mordant is mordir, and I may not be saying that correctly, but what it means is to bite, which it really makes sense when you think about it, because the when you soak fabric or fiber in this bath of mordant, because the salts are able to be dissolved in water, when you do that, it's going to chemically attach itself and help the dye to like attach itself chemically to that fabric, those fibers that you're dyeing, so it's not going to wash out. So it's really, really important to understand mordants in the natural dye process. The other thing to keep in mind when you're working with mordants is that they can be toxic. So obviously you wouldn't want to ingest anything. Use your common sense. And if you're going to be working with them, you need to be working somewhere that's properly ventilated, where you have a respirator and gloves. And then the last thing I want to say about that is never use any pot or spoon or any equipment that you use with a mordant, also with your cooking supplies that you cook your food with. This is really dangerous, obviously, because you don't want to ingest it, and it can be toxic if you're inhaling it over long periods of time. So, that may lead to, health issues later down the road. So it's, it's really important to be mindful of these things when working. But also, if you're really into natural dye, don't be afraid to work with mordants, because they're a really wonderful way to get that really rich color, fast dye color that you want. And it also can alter the colors, which is very exciting. For example, if you use the tin mordant, you might get a brighter color. If you use like an iron mordant, you're going to get kind of a duller result with that same color. So the mordants can alter the color that is going to result just by using different ones as a mordant. So it's really exciting stuff. I'm going to show you, this is an example of a mordant and how they come. This is aluminum acetate. This is a pretty common one. This is probably less toxic than a lot of them. Copper, I believe, is the worst as far as toxicity goes. But yeah, this one is supposed to be better for cellulose and silk fibers. So I got this to dye some linen, and you can buy these like online through different people. There's lots of different places you can get mordants. So I'm operating at home, and we're not going to use mordants today. So we're going to use a natural dye that doesn't need a mordant, and that's because it has naturally occurring tannins. You've probably heard of tannins if you're a wine drinker. So some materials that you can use for natural dye also have tannins in them. So today we're going to use onion skins. Onion skins are a great dye material. They've got tons of natural tannins in them, and they're going to give us a really lovely color. So we're going to do red onions today. You can also use yellow onions. White onions, I have not used. They may produce a paler color, so keep that in mind. Just as an example of some other materials you can use. So these are avocado skins and pits. That's the cat that I've been collecting, and I keep them in the freezer. So when I get enough to do a lot of fabric, then I've got enough material, and they're not getting all nasty and rotten and decaying in my kitchen. Another example I pulled from the freezer. This is a bag of black walnuts. Black walnuts also have natural tannins, so you don't need to use a mordant with them. And they make this really beautiful brown color. So that's another really exciting natural dye, and those are things that you can recycle in your kitchen, or you can go outside and find them. Okay, so next I'll walk you through materials and what you need, and then we'll get started with the dye process. So what I've got set up before you is the different materials that we're going to need for doing our natural dye today. First thing you're going to need is a large pot, and I've already filled mine up with about 1/3 of water, and I'm just using water from the sink. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't need to be distilled necessarily. And what I've done is just laid the onion skins on top. So when you're thinking about how much water, how much dye material you need to consider what you're actually going to dye. So what I've got here is a couple different materials so we can see what the results are going to be with the onion skins and how that's going to change based on material. So what I have is this yarn. It's an alpaca blend, alpaca and nylon, I believe. So the wool is going to dye and the nylon's not. So if you have anything synthetic, it's not going to dye with a natural dye. It needs to be a natural fiber. So this one's an alpaca wool. This is linen, and it's just a raw natural linen. And then I have two types of cotton. So this cotton has been totally bleached white, and this is just a natural color cotton. So we can kind of compare the differences there. This is all the material that I'm using. If you'd like to get really specific and try to get similar results if you're doing multiple dye baths, keep copious notes, but make sure to weigh your material out, okay? And that's going to be your deciding factor in figuring out how much dye material you're going to need and how big your pot and the water needs to be. So I've got quite a bit of red onion skins. I would say this is probably 3 to 4 cups worth of onion skins. And the amount of water I have in this pot is probably close to maybe 2.5 quarts, 3 at the most. This I know is going to be plenty. It's probably more water and more dye material than I need to dye just these small samples. A good kind of test to think about is you want whatever you're dyeing. So if you have a piece of fabric, you want it to be able to move freely within your dye pot. So they're sitting on top, but I'm going to grab a slotted spoon. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of punch those down, mix them up a little bit so they start to get wet. And the first thing that I want to go ahead and start doing is I want to start extracting my dye. So my dye stuff is in my pot. It's on the stove. I'm going to go ahead and cover it. There's nothing else in this bath but water and the dye material. I'm going to turn it up to high because I want this to boil. So I'm going to turn it up to high. And you're going to want it to boil for a good like 30, maybe even 45 minutes, depending on how strong you want your dye bath. But that's going to essentially make sure that all of the color is really gotten out of that dye material. So that's the first thing I want to do, extract my dye. All right, now I've got my dye materials, the fiber's ready. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a bowl of water. This is 3 quarts of water, and it's got 1 tablespoon of salt. So what salt does is it is going to help open up that fiber, and then it's going to also help make sure that the dye is evenly distributed over all the surfaces of that fiber. So I dissolved it in water, and it should be hot water. And you can just get hot water from your tap. You don't need to boil it or anything. And so that the heat and the salt, they're both going to help open up the fibers and get them ready for the dye bath. So I'm just going to put these in here. Make sure to hold them down so they get nice and soaked. All right, so... And the best thing to do is you want these to be wet when you put them in the dye bath. So this isn't something that you should like do the day before. This is something you need to do like right before you put it in your dye bath. All right, so we're gonna let those hang out and soak. So your materials need to soak for at least 20 minutes. They need to be like soaked all the way through. Because anything that's dry is just not going to take the dye as well. All right, so I'm going to let those soak in there. Again, this is, a bit of a big bowl for this dye material, but it gives you a sense of how much salt to water ratio that you need to work with. Okay, so some of the other things that we have on hand, a timer, because, you want to be timing things. So yeah, I should probably put that... We're going to put it on 30 minutes. so I can time how long my dye material is boiling in my pot. All right, so can put our materials aside. So some other things that I want to talk about are right here in front of me. So some people may have heard vinegar can also be used instead of a mordant. And vinegar is not a mordant. It does help fix some color. You can add, if you have this much of water, then you can add about 2 tablespoons of vinegar and let your materials soak in that after they've come out of the dye bath so that it can help fix some of the color. Sort of like when you're making Easter eggs and you're dyeing them different colors. But the thing is, since dyeing is a chemical process, the things that you add to it can change and will change the pH of the dye bath. And that's going to change the color of that dye bath as well. So vinegar is actually going to make your dye bath a little more acidic. And that's going to change some of the color. Some other things that you can add to also change the pH is baking soda, cream of tartar, and citric acid, which is, you can find this at grocery stores. It's for, canning things, pickling things. And again, cream of tartar and baking soda are also things that you can find at the store. So if you, again, get more into natural dyes, and these are different things that you can add to your dye bath to alter the color, and that's because the pH is changing. So some very exciting things to consider. So let's talk a little bit about salt. So the salt is helpful to add to your, some people add it to the dye bath as well. It's really important for the pre-soak. Something I want to point out, I'm using table iodized salt. This is okay, but it's not ideal, and that's because when you start introducing other minerals or chemicals to the salt, it's getting added to the dye bath, and that can affect the pH of your dye bath. So while table salt is going to work just fine for what we're doing today, I would, if you are getting more interested and more serious, pick salt that is just like non-iodized and not sea salt, because sea salt has other minerals in it. But you can do rock salt, you can do, kosher salt. It doesn't really matter what form that it comes in, if it's, chunkier or really fine. But just something to keep in mind. All right, guys, it's been about almost 15 minutes. And you can see that the dye bath is nice, and it's got a really heavy rolling boil on it. And if we take a peek, it's got such a beautiful red, kind of brown color. So we're going to continue to let that boil to really extract out the dye. And then we will start adding our dye materials. All right, everyone. So it's been 30 minutes, and my dye bath is nice and just dark and beautiful. Let's look at that color. It's really nice and rich. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and turn the heat off. Now there's 2 different ways that you could go about doing the dye. So you could go ahead and strain all of this dye stuff out, these onion skins, and then you could add your material straight to your pot. And then you could allow it to just stay on really low simmer for like 7 to 12 hours on the stove. It's really important once you add your dye materials to not boil it, okay? Boiling it was solely for the purpose of extracting the dye. But what I'm going to do is I've got a small little container here, and I'm going to let these soak overnight. So it's going to have a full 24 hours inside of the dye bath. So it's really, really going to have a lot of time to soak up all of that dye. So that's something that's really important when you're naturally dyeing. Heat, okay, and time are your best friends. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add the dye. So now I've got this dye bath. So I'm going to add it to this container. So this container is a good size for the sample materials we're working with. They're gonna have plenty of room to move around, and they're gonna be able to get all of the dye that they need. So we're just gonna carefully ladle it in here. And I'm probably gonna go half, if not 2/3 of the way full, because I wanna make sure that they're nice and submerged into this little dye vat. So now, since I just boiled a bunch of onions, I'm not gonna let it go to waste. I'm gonna use this as a soup stock, and because it's nice and clean, it's literally just been onions. So we don't have to pour all of that out. Obviously, if I was doing more material, I could just put it straight into this pot, because I've got enough to do more material than what we're dyeing, but I'm gonna use it as for food. So I've got this full. And I'm just gonna go ahead, take these out. And like I said, you want these to be, you know, still wet. You can squeeze them out a little bit, but they can still be a little bit drippy. And I'm gonna start putting those into the pot. And you can see they're already starting to take the color. Gosh, isn't that pretty? All right. Okay, so here we've got the cotton. We're gonna put that in, the other cotton. And lastly, the linen. All right, so it's pretty hot, so I'm gonna use this. So I just wanna like swish them down. See, they've got plenty of room to move about in this. Nice, nice, nice. So you can already see that they're starting to take color. That's so exciting. Onions are a really wonderful natural dye. They work really well. I think you can get really successful results. Then I'm going to close the lid and don't put it in the fridge. You know, let it stay hot. That's going to help it to dye. So I'm just going to let that sit overnight. Hey guys, so this is our little dye vat with the fibers inside. It's been sitting for a full 24 hours. And now it's time for the fun part, the big reveal. All right, so let's go. Oh my gosh, that's so lovely. This is the linen. Can you believe that? Gorgeous. I'm just going to kind of set them here, and then we'll do a little rinse. All right, here's one of the cottons. Here's another. I'm not sure which is which. It's pretty hard to tell. Yeah, I have no idea. They look pretty, both pretty saturated with the same color. All right, and then here's our alpaca. So remember, this was, it's a blend with nylon, so you can see that it did not take the color as deeply as the linen and the cotton. I think the linen did the best. That is fantastic. Oh, I love that. So dye bath, if you're gonna do a lot of repeated dyeing, you could probably keep this and get some more color out of it. But that's, you know, totally up to you and up to your processes. I'm going to dump it out because I don't need it anymore. So it's so great. You can just go down your sink, non-toxic. And you can tell that we have been cooking today because we have a very dirty sink. So I'm just filling this up with some clean, cool water to rinse things out. All right, so I'm just gonna give them a little swish. This rinsing process is probably not gonna be as intensive as if you had a really big piece of fabric. That looks a lot more faded. There's a little bit of color. So that, yeah, did not take it super well. I'm just gonna use the same in here. So you can tell the onion really, really did a good job getting the color. Ugh, the linen looks so yummy. Look at that beautiful color. I'm just amazed. All right. And then our two cottons. Again, one was natural, one was white. If I had to guess, I'd say this one was the white one and this one was the natural. This one
Looks like it has a little more yellow in the color. This one looks a little bit of a cleaner, kind of cooler red. That's probably what I would say. So I'm going to rinse those. And when you rinse, you really need to do it, as many times as you need for the water to run clear when it starts to drip off of your fiber. So I could just pour this out and get clean water and then start the whole process over again. One more thing you could do before you rinse, you take them out and then you can get the white vinegar that I showed you guys yesterday. And you could fill, for this amount of material, this amount of water in this size container would probably be fine. Maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit more. And I would probably put, for this size, maybe half a tablespoon of white vinegar in with the water and then let these things soak in that bath, that vinegar bath, for just a couple minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And that is going to allow the vinegar to help set some of these colors. Again, that's a really great thing to do if you're working with material that doesn't have a tannin. Maybe something that's a little more finicky, like this wool kind of seems to be. And yeah, so that's definitely an option. But again, remember, don't leave it in too long or it might start to alter or strip the color in a negative way. And after that's done, then you would go through a rinsing process with just plain water. So you don't want to add anything else to it. You just want to rinse all of that extra dye color out. So there you have it. Natural dyed. You can see different materials and some really lovely results. So I hope you guys had a really great time learning about this. I had a good time teaching. So, all right, thank you.
Stay tuned for a special bonus video interview with Diana Pemberton and a closer look at textiles. Thanks for watching this week, and I hope you have a good one. Bye.